The scream that split the morning air brought Yates Emerson running from the barn, his hand already reaching for the Colt at his hip before he realized the sound carried more desperation than danger. He skidded to a halt in the dusty street of Greeley, Colorado, watching as a woman in a faded calico dress stumbled from the general store, clutching her empty reticule like it might suddenly produce coins through sheer force of will. The June sun beat down mercilessly on this morning in 1883, and Yates found himself staring at the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, even as tears carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "Please," she was saying to the shopkeeper who had followed her out, his face set in stern lines. "My husband will settle the account. He promised me he would. I just need flour and beans enough to last the week." The shopkeeper crossed his arms. "Mrs. Sullivan, I have extended credit to your household for 3 months now. Your husband comes in here buying tobacco and whiskey regular as clockwork, paying cash for his own pleasures, but the family account remains untouched. I cannot continue this arrangement." Yates watched the woman's face crumble, watched her shoulders curve inward as if trying to disappear into herself. She was thin, he realized, too thin, with the kind of hollow-cheeked gauntness that spoke of regular hunger. Her dress hung loose on her frame, though it had clearly been taken in multiple times, the evidence of her needlework visible in the careful seams along the sides. "I understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I am sorry to have troubled you." She turned away, and Yates saw her sway slightly, one hand reaching out to steady herself against the storefront. Something in his chest twisted hard, and he found himself moving before conscious thought could intervene. "Excuse me, madam," he said, pulling his hat from his head as he approached. "I could not help but overhear. Perhaps I might be of assistance." The woman's eyes lifted to his, and Yates felt the impact of that gaze like a physical blow. Her eyes were the color of summer grass, green and bright, despite the tears pooling in them. She was perhaps 25, with dark honey-colored hair pulled back in a simple bun, strands escaping to frame her delicate face. "I cannot accept charity from strangers," she said softly, but her voice carried a thread of steel beneath the exhaustion. "Then consider it neighborly assistance," Yates replied. He turned to the shopkeeper. "Put Mrs. Sullivan's usual order on my account and add whatever else a household of her size might need. Meat, sugar, coffee if you have it." "I cannot possibly accept," the woman protested, but Yates could see the desperate hope flickering in her expression, warring with her pride. "Madam, I have been working the Garrett Ranch for 5 years now, and I live alone in a bunkhouse where all my meals are provided. My wages have been accumulating with precious little to spend them on. It would be my genuine pleasure to ensure a lady does not go hungry." The shopkeeper looked between them, then shrugged and headed back inside. Yates gently took the woman's elbow, guiding her to the wooden bench outside the store. She sank onto it gratefully, and up close, he could see the fine tremor in her hands, the way she held herself with careful dignity despite the obvious weakness in her limbs. "I am Yates Emerson," he said, sitting beside her with a respectful distance between them. "I work the Garrett spread just north of town." "Lucia Sullivan," she replied quietly. "I live with my husband Thomas about 2 miles east of here. We have a small homestead." "How long has it been since you have had a proper meal, Mrs. Sullivan?" Yates asked the question gently, but he watched her face carefully. She flushed, embarrassment staining her cheeks. "I eat. I simply have not been very hungry lately." "That is not what I asked." Lucia's hands twisted together in her lap, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. 3 days since I have had anything substantial, but my husband eats well. He needs his strength for working the land." Anger, hot and sudden, flooded through Yates's chest. He had seen men like Thomas Sullivan before, men who considered their wives property rather than partners, who took without giving, who believed themselves entitled to every comfort while their families suffered. He forced his voice to remain calm. And the money from your homestead, your crops. Thomas handles all the finances, Lucia said, and Yates heard the careful neutrality in her tone, the way she had learned to speak about her husband without revealing too much. He says we barely scrape by, that there is nothing extra. I believed him until I started noticing his new boots, his frequent trips to the saloon. When I asked about the discrepancy, he told me I did not understand business matters and should not trouble myself with such things. He is lying to you, Yates said bluntly, and he is stealing from you. From your own mouth and body. Lucia turned to look at him fully then, and he saw something kindle in her eyes, a spark of anger that had perhaps been smoldering for far too long. I know, she whispered. I have known for some time, but what can I do? I have no family here, no means of supporting myself. I am trapped. The shopkeeper emerged then with 2 large crates filled with supplies. Yates stood and paid him, then loaded the boxes into the back of a small wagon that Lucia indicated was hers, hitched to an old mare that looked as underfed as her mistress. Let me drive you home, Yates said. I can tie my horse to the back. Lucia hesitated, then nodded. Thomas is away in Denver for the next 2 days. He went to conduct some business, which meant he would not be there to intercept the supplies, Yates thought. Smart woman. He retrieved his gelding from the hitching post and secured the reins to the wagon, then climbed up beside Lucia and took the reins of the mare. The horse moved forward with visible relief, as if grateful to have a lighter hand on the lines. The ride to the Sullivan homestead revealed more than Lucia's words could have. The small house was in disrepair, with loose boards and a sagging porch. The garden had been neglected, though Yates could see evidence of recent desperate attempts to revive it. Fresh dirt turned around struggling bean plants and wilted tomato vines. A few chickens scratched in a pen made from scrap wood, thin and bedraggled. The barn, however, stood in perfect condition, freshly painted and sturdy, and inside Yates glimpsed a fine horse, well fed and groomed to a shine. That is Thomas's horse, Lucia said quietly, following his gaze. Thunder. He is very particular about Thunder's care. Yates said nothing, but his jaw clenched tight. He unloaded the supplies into the kitchen, which was sparse and clean despite its poverty. A cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and a rough table with 2 chairs sat in the center. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, none of the small comforts a woman usually brought to a home. How long have you been married, Mrs. Sullivan? Yates asked as he set the last crate on the counter. 4 years, Lucia replied. She had taken out the flour and was running her hands over the sack almost reverently. We met in Missouri, where I was living with my aunt after my parents passed. Thomas seemed kind at first, ambitious. He spoke of opportunity in Colorado, of building a life together. I was 19 and lonely and stupid enough to believe him. You were not stupid, you were trusting. There is a difference. Lucia smiled sadly. Perhaps, but the result is the same. Yates watched as she began unpacking the supplies, organizing them with careful efficiency. She moved slowly, conserving energy, and he realized she was probably dizzy from hunger and exhaustion. Without asking permission, he stoked the fire in the stove and found a pan. "What are you doing?" Lucia asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Making you breakfast." "When was the last time someone cooked for you?" She stared at him, and tears began sliding down her cheeks again. "I cannot even remember." Yates fried eggs and bacon, thick slices that filled the kitchen with their aroma. He made coffee strong and sweet, and toasted bread over the stove top until it was golden. He plated everything with a care he usually reserved for gentling horses, then set it before Lucia at the table. "Eat," he said simply. She did, slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, as if her body was remembering what it felt like to be nourished. Yates made himself a smaller portion and sat across from her, sipping coffee and watching the color gradually return to her face. When she finally set down her fork, she looked more alive than she had since he first saw her. "Thank you," Lucia said, and her voice was steady now, stronger. "You have been extraordinarily kind to a stranger." "You are not a stranger anymore," Yates replied. "And I cannot simply walk away knowing your situation." "You must," Lucia said firmly. "Thomas is not a violent man, but he is jealous and proud. If he learns another man has been helping me, has been in our home, it will only make things worse for me after you are gone." Yates leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Then leave him. Come to town, find work, start over. You do not have to live like this." "And what work would I find?" Lucia asked, her tone sharp with reality. "I have no references, no skills beyond keeping house and tending garden. The only employment available to women alone in towns like Greeley are positions I will not consider. No, Mr. Emerson, I am trapped as surely as if I wore iron chains. Not if you had help, not if someone was willing to stand with you." Lucia met his eyes, and Yates saw the fear there, but also a desperate, fragile hope. "Why would you do this? You do not know me. I could be a terrible person for all you know. Because no one should starve while the person who vowed to care for them grows fat and comfortable. Because you deserve better. Because from the moment I saw you in that street, something in me recognized something in you, and I cannot simply walk away and pretend I never saw what I saw." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Finally, Lucia spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "He keeps all the money in a lockbox in the barn, hidden in the false bottom of the tack trunk. I discovered it by accident 6 months ago when I was looking for a spare bridle to sell for food money. There were hundreds of dollars inside, Mr. Emerson, hundreds, while I was eating potato peelings and trying to decide which dress to cut up to patch the other because I could not afford fabric." Rage, white-hot and righteous, swept through Yates. "Did you confront him?" "Yes. He told me that money was for the future, for securing our position, and that I was selfish for wanting to fritter it away on unnecessary luxuries like food and clothing. Then he moved the lockbox and would not tell me where. I have not been able to find it since." Yates stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I need to go before I do something we will both regret. But Mrs. Sullivan, Lucia, I want you to know something. You will never starve again. I swear that to you. Whether you choose to leave your husband or not, I will find a way to ensure you are cared for." Lucia stood as well, and before Yates could react, she crossed the space between them and placed her hand on his arm. The touch sent electricity racing through his body, and he looked down at her upturned face, at the gratitude and something more complicated shining in those green eyes. "Why?" she asked again. "Please, I need to understand why you would risk so much for me." Yates raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently cupped her cheek. She leaned into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "Because I have been alone my entire life," he said quietly. "I was orphaned at 12, raised by a succession of ranch hands and kind strangers. I learned to work hard, to keep my head down, to expect nothing from anyone. And in all those years, I never once felt a connection to another person the way I felt one the moment I saw you. It was like recognizing someone I had been waiting for my whole life without knowing they existed." "I am married," Lucia whispered, but she did not pull away from his touch. "I know." And I will not ask you to betray your vows, but I can be your friend, your ally. I can make sure you are safe and fed. The rest, if there is to be a rest, can wait until you are free." Tears spilled over, running down to wet his hand. "I do not know if I can ever be free. Divorce is nearly impossible, and even if I could obtain one, I would be ruined. No decent person would associate with me." "Then we will find indecent people to associate with," Yates said with a small smile. "I have never been particularly concerned with propriety anyway." Lucia laughed, a startled, genuine sound that transformed her face. Yates realized she was even more beautiful when she smiled, and he found himself wanting to spend the rest of his life finding ways to make her laugh like that. "I should go," he said reluctantly, lowering his hand. "But I will be back in 2 days to check on you. If your husband is still in Denver, I can help you with any repairs or work around the homestead. If he has returned, I will simply ride past and tip my hat like a neighborly stranger." "Agreed." "Agreed," Lucia said. "But Mr. Emerson, Yates, please be careful. I could not bear it if something happened to you because of me." "I will be careful," he promised. "But I have handled difficult men before. Your husband does not frighten me." He left her then, climbing onto his horse and riding back toward the Garrett ranch with his mind churning. He spent the next 2 days working with an intensity that made his fellow ranch hands give him a wide berth, channeling his anger and frustration into mending fences and breaking horses. At night, he lay awake in his bunk, thinking of Lucia's thin face, her brave attempt at dignity, the way she had leaned into his touch like she was starving for kindness as much as for food. On the 3rd day, he rode back to the Sullivan homestead, his saddlebags packed with more supplies. As he approached, he saw smoke rising from the chimney and heard the sound of hammering. Rounding the house, he found Lucia on the roof, a hammer in her hand and a mouth full of nails, working to replace loose shingles. "Good God, woman, get down from there before you break your neck," Yates called up, his heart in his throat at seeing her balanced so precariously. Lucia looked down, her face breaking into a smile that made his pulse race. "Thomas is staying another 3 days in Denver. He sent a wire to the post office, and the clerk brought it by this morning. I decided I was tired of rainwater dripping on my head every time it storms." Yates dismounted and scaled the ladder propped against the side of the house with easy familiarity. When he reached the roof, he held out his hand. "Give me the hammer. You can hand up shingles and nails. I have been repairing ranch buildings since I was 15. This is work I can do." They labored together through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Lucia told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents who had run a small mercantile before fever took them both in a single terrible week. She spoke of her aunt who had taken her grudgingly, making it clear Lucia was a burden, how Thomas's courtship had seemed like salvation at the time. Yates shared his own history, the fragments he could remember of parents who died in a wagon accident, the years of being passed from ranch to ranch, learning to work before he learned to read, finding his education in the rhythms of cattle drives and horse training. He told her about the Garrett ranch, how old man Garrett had taken a particular interest in him, teaching him to manage books and handle business, preparing him for the day when he might have his own spread. "You want that?" Lucia asked, handing him another shingle. "Your own ranch." "I always thought I did," Yates replied, hammering nails with steady strokes. "But lately I have been thinking that land and cattle only matter if you have someone to build a life with. Otherwise it is just work for work's sake." Lucia was quiet for a moment. "I used to dream of a real home. Not just a house, but a place filled with warmth and laughter and children. I thought that was what I would have with Thomas. Instead, I have a prison with a husband who sees me as nothing more than an unpaid servant who occasionally warms his bed." Yates's hand tightened on the hammer, but he kept his voice even. "That will not be your life forever. I promise you that." They worked until the roof was sound, then moved to the garden. Yates helped her properly stake the tomato plants and showed her how to mulch around them to retain moisture. They hauled water from the well and gave everything a deep soaking. By the time the sun began its descent toward the mountains, the homestead looked cared for in a way it clearly had not been for months. Inside, Lucia insisted on cooking dinner for them both. She moved around the kitchen with more energy than she had possessed 3 days before, the regular food clearly already making a difference in her strength. She made a simple stew with the beef Yates had brought, thick with vegetables and savory with herbs she had dried from her struggling garden. They ate together as the light faded, talking about everything and nothing. Yates found himself watching the way lamplight caught in her hair, the graceful movements of her hands, the sound of her voice washing over him like music. He realized with stunning clarity that he was falling in love with her, had perhaps been in love since that first moment outside the general store. "You are staring," Lucia said softly, a blush rising in her cheeks. "I apologize. I do not mean to make you uncomfortable." "You do not make me uncomfortable," she replied, meeting his gaze. "You make me feel seen. There is a difference." Yates reached across the table and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "I know we have known each other only 3 days. I know you are married and I have no right to feel what I feel. But Lucia, I need you to know that I am falling in love with you, have fallen in love with you. And whatever happens, whatever you decide, that will not change." Lucia's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been fighting it, telling myself it is just gratitude or desperation, but it is more than that. When I am with you, I feel like the person I was supposed to become before life beat it out of me. You make me want to be brave." "Then be brave," Yates urged. "Leave him. Come to town. I will find you a place to stay, help you find work. We can take this slowly, do things properly, but please do not stay in this house with a man who treats you like you are worthless." "I am afraid," Lucia admitted. "What if Thomas comes after me? What if he hurts you? What if I ruin your reputation by association? Let me worry about Thomas. As for reputation, I have survived this long without much of one. I think I can manage to survive a little scandal if it means having you in my life." They sat in the gathering darkness, hands clasped across the table, and made their plans. Lucia would pack her few belongings discreetly over the next 2 days. When Thomas returned from Denver, she would tell him she was leaving. Yates would be there when she did it, to ensure Thomas did not become violent. They would bring her to town, and Yates would speak to Mrs. Garrett, the rancher's wife, who he knew had a kind heart and might be willing to take in a woman in need. "After that?" Lucia asked. "After that, we court properly. I visit you in town, bring you flowers, take you on walks. We let people see that you are a respectable woman who left an untenable situation, not some scarlet woman running off with a lover. We wait a proper amount of time, and then I help you file for divorce on grounds of abandonment and failure to provide. It will not be easy, but it can be done. And then," Lucia's voice was barely a whisper, "and then, if you will have me, I marry you. We find our own piece of land, build our own home, fill it with all the warmth and laughter and children you dreamed of. We build the life you deserve, the life we both deserve." Lucia stood and moved around the table, and Yates rose to meet her. She stepped into his arms, and he held her carefully, reverently, feeling the way she fit against him as if they had been designed to stand exactly this way. Her head rested against his chest, and he felt her trembling. "I am terrified," she murmured against his shirt. "I know. But you are not alone anymore. I am here, and I am not going anywhere." They stood like that until full darkness fell, and then Yates reluctantly pulled away. I should go. I do not want to, but I will not compromise you any further than I already have. Will you come back tomorrow? Lucia asked. Every day until we leave this place together, Yates promised. I will be here. He kept his word. Over the next 2 days, he arrived each morning and left each evening, helping Lucia prepare the homestead for her departure while maintaining the fiction that everything was normal should any neighbors happen by. They worked, they talked, they learned each other's habits and histories. And they fell deeper in love with every passing hour, the kind of love that grows from genuine friendship and mutual respect, from shared labor and honest conversation. On the afternoon of the second day, a rider approached with a telegram. Thomas Sullivan would be arriving home the following morning. The time for planning was over. The time for action had come. That night, Yates did not leave. He slept in the barn, his hand on his gun, watching the house to ensure Lucia was safe. When dawn broke pink and gold over the Colorado plains, he moved to the porch and waited. Thomas Sullivan arrived mid-morning, riding his fine horse Thunder, his saddlebags bulging with what Yates suspected were new purchases for himself. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and handsome in a coarse way, with dark hair and a thick mustache. His clothes were expensive, his boots polished to a high shine. He looked prosperous and well-fed, a stark contrast to the woman who waited for him inside the house. Thomas pulled up short when he saw Yates on the porch. "Who are you and what are you doing on my property?" "My name is Yates Emerson, and I am here as a friend to your wife." Thomas's face darkened. "My wife does not need friends. Get off my land before I shoot you for trespassing." The door opened behind Yates, and Lucia stepped out. She had dressed carefully that morning in her best dress, had pinned up her hair with particular care. She looked beautiful and dignified and utterly resolved. "Thomas, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "We will talk after I deal with this interloper," Thomas growled, dismounting. "No," Lucia said, moving to stand beside Yates. "You will listen to what I have to say first." Something in her tone made Thomas pause. He looked between them, and Yates saw understanding begin to dawn in his expression, followed quickly by rage. "You unfaithful whore," Thomas hissed. "I leave for a few days, and you take a lover into our home." "I have been faithful to vows you abandoned long ago," Lucia replied, her voice ringing with anger now. "I have been a loyal wife, working myself to exhaustion while you stole every penny meant for our household and spent it on your own pleasures. I have starved while you grew fat. I have worn rags while you bought new clothes. No more, Thomas, I am leaving you." "The hell you are," Thomas snarled, starting toward the porch. "You are my wife. You belong to me." Yates stepped forward, placing himself between Thomas and Lucia. "She belongs to no one but herself. And she has made her choice. You can accept it like a man, or I can help you accept it. Your decision." Thomas's hand dropped to the gun at his hip. "You think I will not shoot you down like the dog you are? I think if you draw that weapon, you had better be prepared to use it, because I am faster than I look and I have more reason to fight than you do." They stood locked in confrontation, tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Then Lucia spoke, her voice cutting through the hostility. "Thomas, I found the lockbox, the new one hidden under the floorboards in the bedroom. I found it 2 nights ago when I was packing my things." Thomas's face went white, then flooded with color. "You had no right." "I had every right. I am your wife, your partner, not your slave. That money was earned from our land, from crops I helped plant and harvest. You stole from both of us, from our future, to fund your gambling and drinking. I counted it, Thomas. Over $700. We could have lived comfortably for years on that money. We could have improved the homestead, bought better stock, made something of ourselves. Instead, you hoarded it like a dragon while I ate scraps and wore rags. Where is it? Thomas demanded. What have you done with it? I took half, Lucia said calmly. $350, my share of what we earned together. The rest is yours. Consider it payment for the years I gave you, the work I did, the humiliation I endured. We are even now, Thomas. I am taking my half and leaving. Thomas lunged forward, but Yates was ready. He caught the larger man's arm, twisting it sharply and forcing him to his knees. You will not touch her, Yates said quietly, but his voice carried a thread of steel that made Thomas freeze. She is leaving, and you are going to let her go. If you come after her, if you bother her, if you so much as speak her name in town in a manner that is anything less than respectful, I will make you regret it. Do you understand me? You cannot threaten me on my own land, Thomas gasped, his arm still locked in Yates's grip. I am not threatening you. I am making you a promise. Now do we have an understanding? For a long moment, Thomas struggled, his pride warring with his instinct for self-preservation. Finally, he nodded, the gesture tight and furious. Yates released him and stepped back, keeping himself between Thomas and Lucia. Lucia, get your things, Yates said without taking his eyes off Thomas. She disappeared into the house and emerged minutes later with a single carpet bag and a small wooden box. Everything she owned in the world, Yates realized, fit into 2 containers. The thought made his chest ache. Yates helped her into the wagon they had prepared the day before, hitching his own horse to the back. Thomas stood in the yard, watching with impotent rage clear on his face. You will regret this, Thomas called out as they began to pull away. Both of you. She is my wife under the law and I have rights. Then exercise them through proper channels, Yates called back. File for divorce yourself if you want to, but if you come near her, you will answer to me. They rode away from the Sullivan homestead, and Yates felt Lucia trembling beside him. He wrapped one arm around her shoulders, keeping the reins steady with his other hand, and she leaned into him with a shuddering sigh. I did it, she whispered. I actually did it. You did, Yates confirmed, pride swelling in his chest. You were magnificent. I was terrified. Brave and terrified are not mutually exclusive. You stood up to a man who has controlled you for 4 years. You took back your power. That takes more courage than most people ever have to summon. They rode into Greeley as the sun reached its zenith, and Yates drove directly to the Garrett ranch. Mrs. Garrett was a formidable woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Yates's explanation with a grave expression, her gaze frequently moving to Lucia's thin frame and nervous hands. Mrs. Sullivan, you are welcome to stay in our guest room for as long as you need, Mrs. Garrett said when Yates finished speaking. I will not abide a man who mistreats his wife, and I have some influence in this town. If Mr. Sullivan attempts to cause trouble, he will find himself facing more opposition than just Yates here. I can work, Lucia said quickly. I do not wish to be a charity case. I can cook, clean, mend, tend gardens, whatever you need. Mrs. Garrett's stern face softened slightly. Can you read and write? Yes, madam. My mother taught me. I can do figures as well. Then I may have a position for you. My husband's bookkeeping has gotten away from him of late, and I do not have the patience for it. If you could help organize his accounts, keep track of expenses and sales, that would be worth room, board, and a salary. What do you say? Lucia's eyes widened. I say yes. Thank you, Mrs. Garrett. You cannot know what this means to me. I know exactly what it means, dear. I was once in a situation not dissimilar to yours. Someone helped me then, and I consider it my duty to help others when I can. Come, let me show you to your room. You look exhausted. As Mrs. Garrett led Lucia away, Mr. Garrett emerged from the barn and walked over to where Yates stood beside the wagon. He was a weathered man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "You have done a good thing today," Mr. Garrett said. "But you should know that Thomas Sullivan has friends in town, men who drink with him at the saloon. This may not be as simple as you hope." "I know," Yates replied, "but I could not stand by and do nothing." "No, I do not suppose you could. You have never been one to ignore injustice, even when it would be easier to do so. It is one of the things I admire about you, son. But keep your eyes open and your gun close. Men like Sullivan do not take well to being humiliated." Yates spent the next weeks working the ranch with one eye always on the house where Lucia stayed. He saw her most evenings, sitting with her on the porch after dinner, talking about their days and their dreams. He courted her properly, bringing her wildflowers from the meadows, taking her on carefully chaperoned walks around the ranch property, treating her with the respect and tenderness she had been denied for so long. He watched her blossom like a plant finally given proper water and sunlight. The gauntness faded from her face, replaced by healthy curves. Color returned to her cheeks and her eyes grew brighter. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely. She threw herself into her work with Mr. Garrett's books, organizing years of haphazard record-keeping into neat, comprehensible columns. She proved to have a gift for numbers and organization, and Mr. Garrett began consulting her on business decisions, valuing her insights. Thomas Sullivan did not make trouble, at least not directly. But Yates heard rumors in town, whispers that Thomas was telling anyone who would listen that his wife had run off with a ranch hand, that she was a loose woman who had betrayed her marriage vows. Some people believed him. Others, who had seen Lucia's situation or heard about it through the efficient grapevine of small-town gossip, knew better. 2 months after Lucia left the Sullivan homestead, Yates approached Mr. Garrett with a proposal. He had been saving his wages for years, and he had enough to make a down payment on a small parcel of land adjacent to the Garrett ranch. With Mr. Garrett's help and a loan from the bank, he could start his own modest spread, running cattle and horses. "You are thinking of the future," Mr. Garrett observed, a knowing look in his eyes. "I am thinking I would like to have something to offer a woman when I ask her to marry me," Yates replied honestly. "And have you spoken to this woman about your intentions?" "Not yet. She is still legally married, though Thomas has made no move to reconcile or provide for her. I am hoping he will agree to a divorce on grounds of abandonment, or that Lucia can petition for one herself based on his failure to provide. That could take time. Years, potentially, depending on how stubborn Sullivan wants to be. I know, but I am a patient man and I am not going anywhere." Mr. Garrett studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I will co-sign your loan at the bank. You have earned it, Yates. You are one of the best men I have ever employed, and I would be proud to have you as a neighbor." The land purchase went through 3 weeks later, and Yates threw himself into building his future. He worked his regular hours at the Garrett Ranch, then spent his evenings and weekends working his own land, building a small but sturdy house, barn, and outbuildings. Other ranch hands helped when they could, and Mr. Garrett loaned him materials and equipment. Slowly, steadily, a homestead took shape. Lucia came to see it one Sunday afternoon, riding in the wagon with Mrs. Garrett as chaperone. Yates watched her face as she took in the house, still rough but solid, with real glass windows and a good roof. He had built the kitchen large, remembering how she moved in that confined space at her old home, wanting her to have room to breathe. "It is beautiful," Lucia said softly, walking through the rooms. "You built this yourself?" "With help from friends," Yates replied. "But yes, mostly myself. I wanted it to be right, wanted it to be a real home." Lucia turned to face him and he saw tears shining in her eyes. "For whom, Yates? Who are you building this home for? You know the answer to that. I am building it for us. For the day when you are free and I can ask you properly to be my wife. For the future I see every time I close my eyes, the one where we wake up together every morning and build a life together. I know that day may be years away, but I am willing to wait. I would wait forever for you, Lucia. She crossed to him and took his hands in hers. What if Thomas never agrees to a divorce? What if I am trapped in this marriage forever? Then we make the best of it. You continue working for the Garretts, I work my land. We see each other as often as propriety allows. We live separate lives that are somehow still together. It will not be perfect, but it will be more than many people ever have. That is not enough for you, Lucia protested. You deserve a real marriage, children, a partner who can actually be your partner in the eyes of the law and the church. What I deserve is you, in whatever form I can have you. Everything else is just details. Mrs. Garrett, who had been examining the house with diplomatic disinterest, cleared her throat. If you two are finished having your moment, I believe there may be another option worth considering. I have been corresponding with a lawyer in Denver who specializes in difficult divorce cases. According to him, Colorado law does allow for divorce on grounds of willful desertion and failure to provide. Lucia has witnesses to Thomas's neglect, including the shopkeeper who refused her credit and multiple people who saw her condition before Yates intervened. We may have a case. Hope flared bright in Lucia's expression, quickly followed by fear. Legal proceedings cost money. I have savings from my salary, but I do not know if it would be enough. I have money, Yates said immediately. The $350 you took from Thomas combined with my savings should be more than sufficient, and if it is not, we will find a way. Lucia shook her head. That money is for building your ranch, for buying stock and equipment. I cannot ask you to spend it on freeing me from a marriage I was foolish enough to enter in the first place. You are not asking. I am offering. Lucia, every penny I have is meaningless if I cannot spend it building a life with you. Let me do this. Let me help you. She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but on one condition. The money I contribute is a loan. When I am free and able, I will repay you from my own earnings. Agreed, Yates said, though he had no intention of ever accepting repayment. Her pride needed the promise, but his heart knew the money was already hers. Everything he had was hers, whether she acknowledged it or not. The legal proceedings began in September of 1883. The lawyer Mrs. Garrett had found, a sharp-minded man named Mr. Patterson, took their case with enthusiasm. He interviewed Lucia extensively, gathering testimony about Thomas's treatment of her, his control of finances, her near starvation. He brought in the shopkeeper, who testified about the family's debt and Thomas's purchases for himself. He documented the condition of the Sullivan homestead compared to Thomas's personal possessions. Thomas fought it, of course. He hired his own lawyer and contested every claim, insisting that Lucia had been a lazy, wasteful wife who could not manage money properly. But his case fell apart when Mr. Patterson produced the $700 Thomas had hidden, asking why a man who claimed poverty would hoard such a sum while his wife went hungry. Thomas had no good answer. The case dragged through the winter and into the spring of 1884. During those months, Yates continued building his ranch, purchasing his first small herd of cattle and a few good horses. Lucia continued managing the Garrett accounts, becoming indispensable to the ranch's operation. And they continued courting under the watchful eyes of the community, maintaining propriety even as their love deepened into something unshakable. In May of 1884, the court granted Lucia her divorce on grounds of failure to provide and willful neglect. She was free. Yates proposed that evening. Kneeling in the garden behind the Garrett house with a simple gold band he had commissioned from the town jeweler. Lucia said yes through tears of joy, and they were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony attended by the Garretts, the ranch hands, and a surprising number of townspeople who had come to respect Lucia's courage and dignity. Their wedding night was spent in the house Yates had built, and he carried her over the threshold with his heart so full he thought it might burst. They made love with the tenderness of people who had waited, who had fought for the right to be together, who understood the value of what they had found. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed Yates had crafted by hand, Lucia traced patterns on his chest and spoke softly. "Thank you for seeing me that day in town. Thank you for not walking away. Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for being brave enough to leave. I was not brave. I was desperate and starving. You were both, and you are the strongest person I have ever known." They built their life together with the same care Yates had used in building their house. They worked the ranch side by side, Lucia proving as adept with cattle and horses as she was with account books. They planted a large garden, and Lucia coaxed vegetables from the Colorado soil with skill born of determination. They purchased chickens and pigs, adding to their livestock gradually as profits allowed. Their first winter as a married couple was hard, with storms that buried the ranch in snow and cold that crept through even the best chinked walls. But they weathered it together, keeping each other warm, telling stories by firelight, making plans for the spring. Yates had never been happier. In March of 1885, Lucia told him she was expecting a child. Yates felt fear and joy in equal measure, terrified of something going wrong, elated at the thought of a family. He became almost overprotective, wanting Lucia to rest constantly, but she laughed at his worry and continued working, though she let him take on the heavier tasks. Their son was born in October of 1885, a healthy boy with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him James, and Yates held his son in his arms and wept with gratitude for everything his life had become. As James grew, the ranch prospered. Yates's reputation as a horseman spread, and people began bringing him difficult horses to train. Lucia's bookkeeping skills ensured they never spent beyond their means, and she invested wisely in expanding their herd. By 1887, they were able to pay off their bank loan entirely, owning their land free and clear. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1887 and another son, Michael, in 1889. The house Yates had built expanded with their family, new rooms added as needed. The ranch hands they hired became like extended family, sharing meals and celebrations. The Garretts remained close friends and allies, Mrs. Garrett becoming a beloved grandmother figure to the children. Thomas Sullivan eventually left Greeley, moving to Denver where his reputation had not preceded him. They heard occasional reports of him through the years, always the same story of a man who could not hold onto anything good, who squandered opportunities and blamed everyone but himself. Yates felt pity for him eventually, though never regret for taking Lucia away from that life. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1894, Yates and Lucia stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. James was 8 now, tall for his age and showing his father's way with animals. Sarah was 7, clever and curious, always asking questions. Michael was 5, sweet-natured and gentle, attached to his mother's skirts. "You remember the day we met?" Lucia asked, leaning against Yates's side. "When I was standing outside that store, convinced my life was over. I remember thinking I had never seen anyone look so brave and so broken at the same time. I remember wanting to fix everything for you right then and there. You did fix everything. You gave me hope when I had none. You saw me when I felt invisible. You promised I would never starve again, and you have kept that promise every single day since." Yates turned to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek in the gesture that had become their signature expression of affection. "You fixed me too. I did not even know I was broken until you showed me what it felt like to be whole." "We fixed each other," Lucia corrected. "We built this life together from nothing but determination and love, and we will continue building it," Yates said, "for as long as we both shall live." They kissed there on the porch while their children played and the sun set gold over their land, over the ranch they had built from desperation and hope and unwavering commitment. The life they had made was not perfect, but it was theirs, earned through courage and hard work, and a love that had started with a simple promise in a dusty Colorado street. "You will never starve again." It was a promise Yates had kept every day since, and would keep until his last breath. And Lucia, the woman who had been starving in more ways than just physical when they met, had blossomed into someone who fed not just her own family, but an entire community with her strength, her wisdom, and her example of what it meant to choose your own life, even when that choice seemed impossible. Their children grew strong and healthy, never knowing hunger, never doubting their worth. James eventually took over managing the ranch, expanding it further with his father's guidance. Sarah became a teacher, bringing education to ranch children across the county. Michael became a veterinarian, combining his gentle nature with his love of animals. Yates and Lucia grew old together on the ranch they had built, their love deepening with each passing year into something vast and unshakable. They faced droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses, but they faced everything together, their partnership the foundation upon which their entire life rested. On a warm evening in the summer of 1920, when Yates was 63 and Lucia was 62, they sat on their porch watching the sun set over land they had worked for 36 years. Their grandchildren played in the yard while their children and their spouses prepared dinner inside. The ranch had grown into something beyond what either of them had imagined that first day, but its heart remained the same, built on love and mutual respect, and the promise that no one in this family would ever go hungry, in body or in spirit. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked, taking Lucia's hand in his, their fingers interlacing with the ease of decades of practice. The struggle, the scandal, the hard years at the beginning. Lucia looked at him with those green eyes that still made his heart race, even after all these years. Not for a single moment. "You saved my life, Yates Emerson, and then you gave me a life worth saving. How could I ever regret that?" "I did not save you," Yates corrected gently. "I just gave you a safe place to save yourself." "Then we saved each other," Lucia said, echoing the words she had spoken years before. "And we have spent every day since building something beautiful from the wreckage we both were." They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged overhead, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived, a love well earned. 3 generations of family moved through the house behind them, their voices and laughter a testament to what could grow from a single moment of compassion, a single choice to see another person's suffering and refuse to look away. The cowboy who had promised a starving woman she would never go hungry again had kept his word in ways that transcended mere food. He had given her safety, respect, partnership, and love. He had given her a home not just in his house but in his heart. And she had given him the same, transforming his solitary existence into a life filled with purpose and joy, and the deep satisfaction of knowing he had made a difference, that his life had mattered. As they sat watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Colorado sky, Yates thought about that morning in Greeley in 1883, about the scream that had brought him running, about the choice he had made to get involved instead of walking away. It had been the best decision of his life, the moment when his real life had finally begun. "I love you," he whispered to the woman beside him, the words as true now as they had been 36 years ago, as they would be until his last breath and beyond. "I love you too," Lucia replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Today, tomorrow, and forever." And in that moment, surrounded by family and built on decades of love and partnership, with the ranch stretching out before them and the stars wheeling overhead, they were exactly where they were meant to be, exactly who they were meant to be with. The starving woman and the cowboy who had refused to let her suffer had built something extraordinary from the ashes of her old life, something that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love and compassion, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be cherished. Their story had started with desperation and hunger, with cruelty and neglect, but it had transformed into something beautiful, a testament to the power of choosing kindness, of refusing to accept that suffering is inevitable, of believing that love can indeed conquer even the darkest circumstances. They had taken the worst moments of their lives and forged them into something golden, something lasting, something that would echo through generations. And as night fell completely and the family called them inside for dinner, Yates and Lucia rose from the porch, hands still clasped, and walked together into the warm, lamp-lit house filled with love and laughter, and the certain knowledge that they had succeeded in building exactly the life they had dreamed of on that first day, when a cowboy had made a promise to a desperate woman, and then spent the rest of his life keeping it in ways neither of them could have possibly imagined.